Preppers spend endless hours planning how to run, how to bug out, move fast, and get out before things go bad. But few ever face the brutal truth. Sometimes you can't run. Sometimes the safest move isn't leaving, it's locking down. And that's where most survival plans fall apart. Because bugging in isn't comfort and it isn't waiting. It's a high-stakes operation that decides whether your home becomes a lifeline or a trap. Most people think bugging in is the easy route, that when everything falls apart, survival is just a matter of shutting the doors, eating what you stored, and waiting for things to get better. But that illusion collapses fast. Because bugging in isn't about hiding, it's about running a full-scale survival operation from inside four walls. The water stops flowing, the grid goes down. Police don't answer, and every mistake, every overlooked detail compounds with time until it becomes a threat as real as anything outside. What most preppers miss is how demanding this strategy really is. It drains your body, stretches your logistics, and breaks your mental resilience if you're not ready for the long haul. That's why so many bug-in plans fail before they're even tested. In this video, we'll go beyond the fantasy version and show you what it truly takes to transform a fixed position into a functioning survival system. We'll expose the hidden challenges most people never plan for, the critical errors that quietly sabotage your safety, and the mindset shift that turns staying home into a deliberate, tactical choice. Because bugging in isn't about doing less, it's about doing more, smarter, under harsher conditions than you ever imagined. And if you want to stop preparing for comfort and start preparing for reality, make sure to subscribe. This is where theory ends and survival truly begins. Most people's idea of bugging in starts and ends with stockpiling. They picture shelves lined with canned food, stacks of bottled water, a generator in the garage, and they assume that's enough. But that belief is one of the most dangerous myths in the preparedness world, because it reduces a complex, dynamic challenge to something that looks more like weekend camping than long-term survival. And the reason this myth persists is psychological. In times of uncertainty, staying home feels safe, familiar, controllable. But safety and familiarity are illusions if you haven't planned for the reality of what happens next. The first mistake is assuming that supplies alone equal readiness. In a prolonged crisis, food and water aren't a finish line. They're a starting point. How you store them, how you ration them, how you protect them from contamination or theft, and how you replenish them when they run out are all questions that simple stockpiling doesn't answer. The second misconception is that isolation is easy. Shutting the door is simple. Staying sealed off from a collapsing society is not. Waste builds up, communications fail, tempers flare, and without careful planning, the very walls you trust to keep danger out can turn into a trap. And perhaps the most underestimated factor of all is time. Most people imagine a crisis lasting days, maybe weeks. But history shows that infrastructure failures, blockades, or urban unrest can stretch for months, long enough to exhaust any unplanned reserve and test even the strongest resolve. This is why the bug-in fantasy is so dangerous. It promises safety through inaction, when real safety demands continuous adaptation, management, and problem solving. Understanding this gap between perception and reality is the foundation for everything that follows, because once you see bugging in for what it truly is, a complex survival operation, not a pause button, you can start building a plan that actually works. And the first layer of that plan, the one that decides whether you make it past the first few days, is water, how to secure it, purify it, and sustain it when the taps run dry. If the first shock of bugging in is realizing that stockpiles alone won't save you, the second, and far more dangerous, is understanding how quickly those same supplies can become liabilities if they're not managed with discipline. In a static survival scenario, time stops being a background detail and becomes your most relentless adversary. Because every hour that passes, your resources shrink, conditions evolve, and small miscalculations snowball into existential problems. Water is usually the first to expose flaws in the plan. Municipal systems often fail within hours, and even generous reserves run out faster than most people expect. One person needs at least a gallon a day for hydration and basic hygiene, which means a family of 4 burns through over 100 gallons in less than a month. Storing that much is not as simple as filling barrels. Containers must be sealed, protected from light and temperature fluctuations, regularly checked for bacterial growth, and above all paired with a replenishment strategy, filtration, rain capture, or purification, because without it, you're just buying time. Food presents a different challenge. Consumption is never static. Stress, cold weather, and increased physical activity all accelerate calorie needs, meaning real-world demand almost always outpaces your spreadsheet estimates. That's why rotation isn't a prepper best practice. It's a survival imperative. Using and replacing food before it expires keeps your stores viable and prevents catastrophic waste when resupply is impossible. Medical logistics are even more unforgiving. Critical medications like antibiotics, insulin, and cardiovascular drugs degrade with time, and once they're gone, they're gone. A resilient plan means coordinating with healthcare providers in advance, learning proper storage techniques, and understanding which over-the-counter alternatives can serve as stopgaps. But even perfect logistics can collapse under human behavior. The longer a crisis lasts, the harder it becomes to enforce rationing, maintain discipline, and prevent panic decisions that drain resources faster than any external threat. That's why successful bug-in operations are less about hoarding and more about system building, creating a dynamic cycle of inventory tracking, consumption forecasting, and proactive adjustments before minor issues spiral into survival-level crises. Because once your supplies are stable, the next challenge emerges, not scarcity itself, but the structural vulnerabilities that surface when your home becomes both your sanctuary and your cage. Even if you master storage and logistics, another layer of complexity waits just beyond your walls, because without power, water pressure, or heating, even the best prepared home quickly becomes hostile. This is the part of bugging in that most people ignore until it's too late. The moment your house stops being a place you live in and becomes an isolated island you have to operate. When the grid fails, the first and most obvious problem is electricity. Lights go dark, communication devices die, refrigeration stops, and even simple tasks become exponentially harder. Building autonomy here starts with scale. Small, decentralized solutions are often more effective and reliable than trying to replicate the entire grid. Solar panels paired with deep cycle batteries, for example, can keep critical systems, lights, radios, medical devices running indefinitely, especially if you design your consumption around efficiency rather than comfort. Portable power stations and hand-crank generators offer redundancy, ensuring that even if sunlight is limited, you still have ways to charge essential gear. Heat is the next battlefield. In winter, lack of heating isn't just uncomfortable, it's life-threatening. Passive methods like insulation, thermal curtains, and minimizing the space you need to warm can buy you precious time, while safe, vented wood stoves or catalytic heaters provide controlled heat without relying on external fuel lines. But safety is critical. Many improvised solutions, like running a gas stove for warmth or using open flames indoors, can lead to deadly carbon monoxide buildup. Water infrastructure follows the same principle. Without municipal pressure, water stops flowing, which means you must either store it in advance or create ways to capture and purify it. Rainwater collection systems, gravity-fed filters, or manually pumped wells can all extend your independence. None of these solutions are foolproof on their own, but layered together, they form a resilient ecosystem that keeps essential systems running long after the grid collapses. And the true challenge isn't just building these backups, it's maintaining them over time. Batteries degrade, filters clog, fuel runs out. Autonomy isn't a one-time investment, it's a continuous process of upkeep, adaptation, and smart prioritization. And once you understand how to keep your environment functioning, a deeper and far more difficult challenge comes into focus. How to keep yourself and your group healthy, safe, and stable when the outside world and the systems you once relied on no longer exist. But even if you master power, water, and heating, there's a reality that no amount of engineering can erase. Once you choose to stay, you stop being invisible. In a crisis, movement draws attention, but so does immobility. A static location isn't just a home base, it's a potential target, and how you prepare for that determines whether bugging in becomes a stronghold or a trap. The first step is shifting your mindset from homeowner to defender. Your house is no longer just a place to live, it's a position to hold, and that means thinking like someone who might want to breach it. Visible signs of wealth, abundant supplies, or advanced security can all attract interest rather than repel it. The goal is controlled deterrence, enough to suggest that an intrusion would be costly without broadcasting that there's something worth taking. Physical defenses begin with layers. Reinforced doors and window locks slow entry, but visibility and access control are just as critical. Trim hedges and obstacles that could provide cover, install motion-triggered lights on approaches, and use simple barriers like furniture or sandbags to strengthen interior choke points. These steps don't make your home impenetrable, but they do change the cost-benefit calculation for anyone considering targeting it. Surveillance and awareness add another layer. Cameras, even low-cost battery-powered ones, can give you real-time visibility, but nothing replaces human observation. Rotating watch schedules within a household ensures that someone is always alert, especially during vulnerable hours like nightfall or dawn. Deterrence, however, isn't always physical. The perception of risk is often more powerful than actual defenses. Signs of occupancy, shifting lights, visible movement, noise, make a property appear active and unpredictable. Even controlled misinformation, like visible neighborhood watch signage or evidence of dog presence, can create doubt. At the same time, operational security, the discipline of what you reveal, is crucial. Never discuss your supplies, routines, or defensive measures outside a trusted circle, and limit visible evidence of stored resources. Finally, always have an escalation plan. If a threat breaches your perimeter, every second counts. Identify fallback positions, safe rooms, and exit routes in advance. Practice silent communication signals with your household. Defense is not about paranoia, it's about preparedness. And if your home is fortified, your resources are protected, and your perimeter is secure, the next challenge is one that can't be solved with walls or weapons, maintaining the health and stability of the people inside. And once you've secured the perimeter and built a defense that keeps danger at a distance, you face a threat that doesn't climb fences or break down doors. It grows quietly inside. In a long-term crisis, the collapse of medical infrastructure means that even a minor wound, a simple infection, or a contaminated water source can spiral into a life-threatening emergency. In this environment, you are no longer just a homeowner or a defender, you are the hospital. The first step is establishing a medical baseline. Every household should have a comprehensive first aid kit, but a real bug-in plan goes beyond bandages and antiseptics. Stock a range of over-the-counter medications like pain relievers, antihistamines, and anti-inflammatories, as well as prescription drugs critical to any household member's ongoing health, and rotate them regularly to maintain potency. Antiseptics, sterile dressings, and suturing kits allow you to treat cuts before they become infections, and basic diagnostic tools like a thermometer, blood pressure cuff, and pulse oximeter help you monitor conditions before they escalate. Clean water is another pillar of survival medicine. Many gastrointestinal illnesses spread through contaminated water, so consistent filtration and purification using boiling, chemical treatments, or mechanical filters drastically reduce the risk of disease. Waste management is equally critical and often overlooked. Human waste and soiled materials become hazardous if not contained properly, so plan for sealed containers, chemical treatments, or improvised latrines that isolate contaminants from living spaces and water sources. Preventive care is just as important as emergency response. Regular hand washing with soap, disinfecting high-contact surfaces, and isolating anyone showing signs of illness can prevent outbreaks before they start. Education is part of this system too. Every adult in the household should understand how to control bleeding, splint a fracture, treat shock, and recognize symptoms of common illnesses. And because some emergencies exceed basic skills, consider first aid and trauma training before a crisis ever begins. Knowledge weighs nothing but can save a life. The goal is simple but vital. Eliminate as many preventable threats as possible so that your energy and resources remain focused on the challenges you can't avoid. Because once health is under control, one final layer remains, and it's often the one that determines whether a bug-in succeeds or fails: the human mind. If medical threats are the most underestimated physical danger of a long-term bug-in, psychological collapse is the most underestimated human one, and it's often the one that proves fatal first. History makes this painfully clear. During wars, sieges, disasters, and even extended blackouts, people rarely fail because they run out of calories or water before their neighbors. They fail because they lose the will to keep going. Isolation, uncertainty, and relentless stress don't strike all at once. They erode discipline slowly, blur judgment over time, and quietly fracture group cohesion until even the most carefully built plan starts collapsing from the inside. The strongest defense against that invisible enemy is structure. A daily routine, even a basic one built around cleaning, maintenance, cooking, or watch rotations, imposes order on chaos and keeps the mind from drifting into despair. Purpose is just as vital. Giving every member of the household a clear role turns passive waiting into active contribution, which builds morale and reinforces a sense of control. Communication is another pillar of psychological resilience. Consistent check-ins, honest conversations about fears and frustrations, and shared decision-making prevent tension from festering into resentment or division. Physical activity plays a dual role here. It keeps the body strong and circulation steady, but it also regulates stress hormones and dissipates pent-up anxiety. Even light exercise or shared chores can have a measurable effect on mental stability. Isolation is harder to combat, but not impossible. Staying informed through radio, satellite messaging, or trusted communication networks maintains a thread of connection to the outside world and reduces the disorienting sense of being cut off. Small rituals also matter more than most realize. Shared meals, scheduled breaks, or moments of distraction act as psychological anchors, preserving fragments of normal life when everything else feels unstable. Perhaps the most critical skill of all is recognizing warning signs early. Withdrawal, apathy, sudden anger, or reckless decision-making are often the first indicators of deeper breakdown. Addressing those issues immediately, rather than ignoring them, can prevent irreversible consequences later. In the end, resilience isn't about eliminating fear or pretending stress doesn't exist. It's about mastering them, using discipline, structure, and shared purpose to turn fear into focus. And once the physical, medical, and psychological pillars of your bug-in plan are all strong, the final challenge is learning how to integrate them so that what you've built isn't just a survival plan, but a living system capable of enduring weeks or even months of disruption. And once the psychological layer is stabilized and the household is functioning as a unit, the final evolution of a successful bug-in is learning to treat it not as a shelter, but as an operational base. Because the truth is that staying and surviving are not the same thing. One is passive, the other is active. A real bug-in plan doesn't end when the doors are locked. That's when the strategic phase begins. The first element of that phase is situational awareness. Crises are fluid by nature, and what was safe yesterday may become untenable tomorrow. Maintaining access to reliable information through shortwave radios, encrypted communication apps, or trusted community networks allows you to track shifting risks, power restoration, troop movements, civil unrest, or environmental hazards. Each piece of intelligence feeds into decision-making, helping you determine whether staying put remains the best option or whether it's time to move. This decision should never be based solely on fear or instinct. Instead, build a clear set of criteria in advance. Thresholds for resource depletion, signs of escalating violence, or indicators of infrastructure recovery. When any of those conditions are met, your plan should shift accordingly. Adaptation also applies inside your perimeter. rotate resource usage to extend longevity, reconfigure defensive positions if local threats evolve, and continually test backup systems before they're needed in an emergency. A bug-in is not a bunker, it's a living system that must evolve as the crisis does. Flexibility is the ultimate survival skill, and it includes knowing when to leave. Sometimes the smartest move is to transition from bug-in to bug-out, using the time, information, and resources you've conserved to move on your terms rather than being forced out by circumstance. This is why bug-in and bug-out are not opposing strategies but complementary ones, two halves of the same survival doctrine. If you understand how to shift between them seamlessly, you're no longer just enduring a crisis, you're controlling the tempo of your response. And it's that control, more than any single tool or stockpile, that separates those who merely survive from those who shape their own outcome. In the end, bugging in is not a fallback plan. It's the final exam of preparedness. It's where theory collides with reality, where every choice you made before the crisis is tested under relentless pressure. Stockpiles, tools, and strategies mean nothing if they cannot operate together as a single, resilient system. Because bugging in isn't about hiding, it's about deliberate control. It's the process of transforming a static space into a living ecosystem, one capable of sustaining life, preserving order, and projecting security when the outside world is defined by chaos. Most people imagine survival as a struggle against external forces, against violence, scarcity, or collapse. But those who truly endure understand that the hardest battle is fought within, against exhaustion, disorganization, and the slow erosion of discipline that time always brings. If you can overcome those, if you can keep the system you've built functioning day after day, then you're no longer surviving by chance, you're surviving by design. And in a world where geopolitical tensions, fragile infrastructures, and unpredictable threats can turn any stable society into a pressure cooker overnight, that difference isn't theoretical. It's the line between being a victim of circumstance and becoming the architect of your own resilience. So now, the question is yours. What do you think is the single hardest part of bugging in? Share it in the comments. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to turn their plan from an idea into a survival reality.